Welcome to another secret stream, beloved Illuminati. We are still chewing our way through the Kabbalah, and I think it is, and I've probably said this already, but it is the most remarkable mystical tool that I think has been devised by any of the systems of which I am aware. And there are certainly some very compelling parallels between modern physics and some of the things that are described in the Kabbalah in terms of the process of systole and diastole, contraction and expansion, and the detailed explanation of how the different energies of the being of the creator harmonized in order to give rise to phenomenal manifestation. And they also offer a lot of insight, being microcosmic reflections of that macrocosm which created the universe or is the universe. These things help us to come to a greater understanding of the internal processes that give rise to our experience and through which we create our own reality. And so bearing that in mind, after he formed the idea of this universe, the particular conception from the vague awareness of his own existence, just trying to see where we should pick up exactly. I don't want to repeat from last week. And that last line was from last week. Then let there be made a great reservoir by excavation, and let this be called the ocean. And now we have a third thing. Okay, so now where we're at basically is the process of generation by the combination of the interplay of antinomies. This, of course, is also the alchemical process. The combining of two things to derive a third thing of a higher nature. And this interplay generally, as I said, is between antinomies. And so because the entire process of creation is a replication by means of reflection, the same way that there was a necessity for this ether to be contracted in order to create a void or a vacuum, wherein something could happen. The same thing is said to have occurred with each of these sephirot, that time and space had a scoop removed, basically, in 10 reservoirs or oceans. Let this great reservoir be divided into 7 beds of rivers, that is, into 7 oblong reservoirs, so that from this ocean the waters may flow forth in 7 rivers, and the source, fountain, and ocean thus make 10 in all. The cause of causes made 10 numerations, and called the source of the spring Keter, corona, the crown, in which the idea of circularity is involved, for there is no end to the outflow of light, and therefore he called this, like himself, endless. For this also, like him, has no similitude or configuration, nor hath it any vessel or receptacle wherein it may be contained, or by means whereof any possible cognizance can be had of it. So we're talking about infinity, which has been on my mind quite a bit lately, because it is, unfathomable. And when we're talking about the creator, it's basically a sort of lame human name for or concept that cannot possibly create any kind of real representation of the deity. And this is why, when people become religious, they generally follow these blind rules and ideas without questioning or really needing an interpretation. But in reality, most of these things did have some kind of reason for their inclusion into these systems before time distorted the original purpose. And so this thing of saying that you should not make a likeness of God because it's a sin, actually originates in the fact that misinformation is not good. We live in an era where that's reiterated for all the wrong reasons ad nauseum, ad infinitum, even. But the real thing is that you don't want to misrepresent truth. You don't want to distort things. And since we're talking about something of utmost importance, misrepresentations lead to, I don't know, religion. And that's kind of where we find ourselves in this boat afloat in a moat, chased by a goat, apparently. And so means whereof it's possible cognizance can be. Yeah, so infinity, you're not going to think of that, you know. I mean, one of the things that I was explaining in a previous stream that I think was the hardest thing for people to wrap their heads around, including me, is that you know, if we're going to live this same life over infinitely, we're also going to experience or not experience every single variation possible. The universe is going to create, and we're talking about the same time scales for every single revolution of this. So, you know, we're talking in billions, maybe trillions of years from start to finish, from systole to diastole, from the original moment of expansion to the first moment of contraction. Same kind of time scales every time, from particles back to particles, right? Sort of boomerang thing, the Phoenix process. Yeah, so it's not just the same thing over and over again, because we know that even at a subatomic level, there are exceptions to every rule, there are variations, there's chaos in the system. If you do an experiment 1 trillion times, you'll get a different result like once, you know? So even if it's true that at the moment of the maximum expansion of this universe, the conditions will be the same. Or it may be better to say that at the moment when the energy has collapsed to its tiniest possible, most compact point, which is what, you know, they say the Big Bang arose from, that the conditions will be identical to the conditions now. Even bearing that in mind, because of this element of chaos, there will be some variation. We're quite sure of that. Here's the thing, though. Infinity means that we will do this, what we're doing now, infinite number of times, but also every single fucking variation of this will also happen an infinite number of times. Infinite variations will happen an infinite number of times. And that just means that it never, ever, 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 ever stops. So it just goes on and 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 on. That Grateful Dead song, Ramble on Rose. I know this song, it ain't never gonna end. You know, that's what he's talking about. I'm going to march you up and down the local county line and take you to the leader of the band. And so after thus forming the crown, he constituted a certain smaller receptacle, the letter Yod, and filled it from the source. And this is called the fountain gushing with wisdom. And it's just so trippy that the fountain gushing with wisdom, I mean, it looks like a spermatozoa. It descends in the, there's this description of the Tetragrammaton in Milo Duquette's book about the Thoth tarot. And once you see the Yod go down the universe's fallopian tube and impregnate it, and how that all, it's really crazy that they were talking about that stuff in that terminology, because we of course weren't supposed to know what a spermatozoa was back then. Kind of seems like somebody did, though. And I have long suspected that there was some extraterrestrial contact, or at least interdimensional contact, but it sounds like literal extraterrestrial contact because of the story in Exodus, where the tribe of Judea is wandering around and they run into this thing flying around in a metal tent, and only Moses is allowed to see its face, and it incinerates people that stand behind it when they piss it off, and it knows all this stuff about, you know, fucking diseases and how they're transmitted. It's a bit weird. It also seems to have a political agenda, and they actually describe this thing like floating around and shooting missiles, basically blowing up the enemy. So I think it's very likely that that the Jews actually did encounter something, and that's where this knowledge is, where the origin with the star tribes of this knowledge. I think it seems like there's actually pretty good evidence for that. And so, of course, if you were a primitive tribe, you would mistake this more advanced being for God. You know, that's not really hard to understand how that might have happened. And the thing just went with it. You know, maybe it was a criminal alien that was like deserted here or whatever, and so he needed a crew, gang. So the fountain gushing with windows, and manifested in this he called himself wise, and the vessel he called Hakma, wisdom, sapientia. And remember that there is some elements being lost in translation here, because Hebrew does not translate well to English. So, you know, when we remember that the Hebrew language is believed to have vibrated reality into existence, the 22 letters, particularly the three mother letters, Aleph, Mim, and Shin, I believe. When he says he called himself wise, it's because the words create the reality. So it's not just like this, I call myself wise, like that's not what it means, but you know what I mean? There's a little bit of getting lost in translation, and then you also have to take into consideration the ontology or the creation mythos that is in play here. Very important. So he called himself wise, which would translate really to he made himself wise, and the vessel of wisdom he called Chachma, wisdom sapientia. Then he also constituted a great reservoir, which he called the ocean, and to it he gave the name Bina, understanding, intelligentia. And this he characterized himself as intelligent or conceiver. He is indeed the absolutely wise and intelligent, but Chachma is not absolute wisdom of itself, but is wise by means of Bina, who fills himself from it. And if this supply were taken from it, it would be dry and unintelligible. And this is basically the masculine and feminine principle. This is the potential and the space and the point. This is Nuit and Hadit. This is darkness and light. This is all of these complementary aspects in their most fundamental form, or the most fundamental form of those complementary aspects, or antinomies. I hope that makes sense, because it's an important element of this recipe. But basically, the potential or the manifester is directed by the masculine principle. So the matter is the feminine, but the masculine is what gives structure and form to it. And it's easy to see that in the natural tendency of people of both sexes, which are real, by the way, in case you have fallen into some confusion about that. There is certainly a spectrum of gender, but fundamentally, people generally are one or the other. And I just want to mention, while we're on the subject, that the reason it matters is not because we want to oppress anyone. It is because once you, what is the word? There's a great word for this. Acquiesce to the denial of objective reality, you are opening Pandora's box to all sorts of evil propaganda. So, not cool. Shouldn't do that. Wouldn't be prudent. Thereupon, 7 precious vessels become, to which are given the following names: Gedula, magnificence or benignity, or chesed, mercy, also pronounced chesed in a lot of diagrams. Geburah, austerity, rigor or severity on the other side. Tiferet in the heart chakra area, which is harmony or beauty. Netzach, victory. Had, glory. Yesod, the foundation or basis. And Malkut, rule, reign, dominion, power. Malkut I've also heard translated as the foundation, and Yesod actually as illusion, which is the foundation or basis. So there are some slight variations on what all this means. He also has Malkut written like Malakot, and I've never heard that before. Um, and then, if you're interested in path working, and it is interesting to look at, there are planetary, there are planets assigned to each of these Sephiroth, along with archangels, and other attributions between the paths are tarot cards. And if you are interested in astrology or just to understand the ancient conception of the music of the spheres, seeing the planetary attributions that are designated to every Sephira can help you to unlock the understanding of the astrological significance of the different planets. These numerations or Sephiroth are held in the Kabbalah to have been originally contained in each other. That is, Keter contained the 9 others. Hakma contained Bina, and Bina contained the last 7. The all is in the all. And to in a way, in a progressively lesser concentration, which is a difficult concept to wrap your head around, I guess. And we have to remember that this all is in the all is a kind of a loose statement. These things are not like absolutely literal in the way that something in scientific literature would be. When we say that the all is in the all, one way to think about that is that if you zoom into matter and just continue with a microscope, bigger and bigger and bigger, it turns out that it's 99% space, empty space, and there's as much distance between the particles as there is, once you're that small, between the Earth and the Moon as there are from a neutron to a proton if you're the same size relative to the nucleus as you are to the Earth, relatively. So, it's that kind of thing. Also, nothingness, the glyph of nothingness is 0, right? The reason you can't calculate the area of a circle is that if you just keep zooming in on the curve, where exactly is the end of it? It just keeps getting bigger. So, there are other meanings to this, but that's a good way to think about it. It's something to bear in mind if you're trying to understand this stuff, that it doesn't mean precisely what it says exactly, but it does. Another great way that I heard it put was this rabbi, I can't remember his name though, I think Simeon Yosef. He said, Keter is in Malkut, and Malkut is in Keter, but after another fashion. And what that means is, as above, so below, that which is within is like that which is without. But in this case, Keter is in Malkut, and Malkut is in Keter, means that the light of the divine consciousness is crystallized in matter, because in the Tree of Life, Earth is attributed to the 10th Sephiroth, Malkut, the foundation. And that is how I think of it. And the moon is illusion, because it's reflecting light that doesn't actually belong to it. And interesting, though, as the 9th Sephiroth, the 9 actually represents truth. So there's this like dualistic manifestation in the placement and the attribution of illusion to the moon Sephira. But what was I saying? Okay, so Keter's in Malkut, Malkut is in Keter, and then light is a wave or a photon, which is a form of matter. So you can see how that works. These things are true, and not, like Aleister Crowley said, all of these things are both true and false, and it is both true and false to say that they are true and false. For all things, says the commentary of Rabbi Jizchak Lorja, Jizchak Lorja, in a certain most abstruse manner, consist or reside and are contained in Bina, and it projects them and sends them downward, species by species, into the several worlds of emanation, creation, formation, and fabrication, all whereof are derived from the potency which was their state there. They descend into actuality. The introduction says, it is said in many places in the Zohar that all things that emanate or are created have their root above. Hence also the 10 Sephirot have their root above in the world of the garment, with the very substance of him. So that's the same thing that I was just explaining. All things that emanate and are created have their root above. That is the light crystallizing in matter or freezing in matter and light in a standing wave. Hence also the 10 Sephirot have their root above in the world of the garment with the very substance of him. And Ein Sof had full consciousness and appreciation prior to their actual existence. And remember that Ein Sof is one of the veils of negative existence. So what we are developing here is a consciousness out of nothing that begins as waves. The veils, basically waves, 3 of them. And then those waves form little seas or pockets of this light or water. So those are our analogies and what's happening. Prior to their actual existence, of all of the grades and impersonations contained manifested within himself with regard to the essence of each and its domination then in potency, when he came to the Sephirah of the impersonation, Malkut, which he then contained hidden within himself, he concluded with himself that therein worlds should be framed, since the scale of the first 9 Sephirot were so constituted that it was neither fit nor necessary for worlds to be framed from them. For all the attributes of these 9 superior Sephirot could be assigned to himself, even if he should never operate outwardly. But Malkut, which is empire, could not be attributed to him unless he ruled over other existences, whence from the point Malkut he produced all the worlds into actuality. That is sort of a reference to the astrological functions of the different planets, in a sense. Some of it I'm not going to pretend that I understand why they're saying that, why dominion could not be attributed to him unless he ruled over other existences and all this stuff. I'm not really sure what that's supposed to mean. These circles are 10 in number, originated by points. They expanded in circular shape. 10 circles under the mystery of the 10 Sephirot, and between them 10 spaces, whence it appears that the sphere of splendor is in the center of the space Malkut of the first occult atom. The first atom in the 10 circles above the splendor is called the first occult atom, and in each of these spaces are formed many thousands of worlds. The first atom is involved in the primal ether, and is the analog of the world Bina. Again, the introduction repeats the first and second descent of Yod into the vacated space to make the light there less great and subtle, and the constitution of the Teheru splendor from the light left behind there by him, the communication of light to him by the female letter He, the emission by him of that light within the sphere of splendor, and the formation thereof within the sphere of a certain sphere called the supreme crown, Corona Summa, Keter, wherein were contained in potence all the remaining numerations, so that they were not distinguishable from it. Precisely as in man exist the 4 elements, in potence specifically undistinguishable, so in this corona were in potence all the 10 numerations, specifically undistinguishable. This crown, it is added, was called after the restoration the cause of causes and the ancient of ancients. The point Keter adds the introduction was the aggregate of all the 10. When it first emanated, it consisted of all the 10, and the light which extended from the emanative principle simultaneously flowed into it, and beheld the 2 universals, that is, the unities out of which manifoldness flows, as for example, the idea within the deity of humanity as a unit out of which the individuals were to flow, the vessel or receptacle containing this emitted light, and the light itself within it. And this light is the substance of the point Keter, for the will of God is the soul of all the things that are. And so I think I'm going to leave you guys with that. Plenty to chew on there. And, it all makes an awful lot of sense, and it seems very logical. 85% of it makes a lot of sense. There does seem to be just some random head cheese every once in a while in there. But, you know, that's our job as magicians and metaphysical philosophers, seekers, however you want to term it, is to go through these older systems and find the wisdom that we have inherited and to extricate it from the morass of chaff in which it is embedded and fuse it together into a more concentrated and more subtle and more substantive, concise, and pointed and poignant system for the future, so that less work is necessary and it is possible to make real progress. So thank you guys very much for your support, and I will see you again very soon.